Katie, check out the codger in the wheelchair. You don't think he's here to exercise, do you? Get real, Jenny. Can you imagine him lifting weights or even walking on a treadmill? I guess you're right. What do you think he's doing here? He can't be here to pick up his grandkid or someone. I mean, there's no way he's still driving. I don't know. He's probably lost and asking for directions to the Social Security office. Or maybe he's got Alzheimer's and is lost from his life. Let's wander over and see what's up. No way. Old people smell like Bengay cream and don't know how to maintain their gaseous odors. And once you get them talking, they don't shut up. Yeah, I guess you're right. I do remember visiting Mom's uncle, Edgar. That man couldn't stop talking about his hip replacement, his bad knees, and the difficulty he had in cleaning his toe jam. Gross. I know, right? Besides, the manager's going over to talk to Pops right now. He'll send him in the right direction. Katie, they're heading to the treadmill, and Gramps is stepping onto it. Oh, man, I can't watch this. Let's get out of here, Jenny. I'm so right behind you. Hi, I'm Sally, and I want to apologize for this very late presentation on this last day of class. I don't know if anyone other than the doctor will be watching this, but I am here to present to you the life stage of late adulthood. And I have tried and tried. It was either the PowerPoint or me. I don't know how to do both. So you get the PowerPoint. Before we begin, I'd like to review some definitions. Functional age, a measurement that focuses on how well people perform their usual roles in their daily lives. Chronological age, this is the measurement used here in the US and is based on years of life. Retirement, the time of life when, after a lifetime of education and work, older adults withdraw from social and civic duties and spend the rest of life doing some hobby until placed into a nursing home or die. Pre-retirement, a newer term of the last decade in which older adults make a slower transition into full retirement by working part-time or changing the type of work performed. Ageism. As coined by Robert Butler in the 60s, it is a process of systematically stereotyping and discriminating against people because they are old, just as racism and sexism accomplish this with skin color and gender. Ageism allows the younger generations to see older people as different from themselves. Thus, they steadily cease to identify with their elders as human beings. Prejudice, an attitude or belief that a person holds about a person or group who has characteristics different from their own. Discrimination, a typically negative treatment of people based on preconceived ideas about them. Stereotype, a mental image about a person or group that is an oversimplified, exaggerated distortion of facts, whether it be positive or negative. Myth, an unfounded or false notion. Excuse me. So let's look at some theories on aging. Psychosocial stages of development. By now, we're all pretty familiar with Erik Erikson's stages of crisis and that it covers the entire lifespan. Disengagement theory. In the 1960s, social scientists Elaine Cumming and Warren Henry stated that there is a mutual agreement and expectation that aged people will withdraw from society as society withdraws from them. Activity theory. Introduced in the 1920s by Lev Vygotsky and colleagues, it wasn't until the 1960s that Robert Havegurst and colleagues applied it to the aged population. It's also known as implicit theory of aging, normal theory of aging, or lay theory of aging. And it proposes that for a person to successfully enter into late adulthood, one must remain physically, mentally, and socially active. Continuity theory. In 1989, Robert Ashley posited that the role of personality is instrumental in determining the outcomes of older age. As people age, they establish life structures, or patterns of being, that result from interacting with others and that connect them with their past experiences. These structures not only offer people a foundation on which they continue to develop, but also determine how people will cope and function in the future. Successful and productive aging. More recently, theories are focusing on remaining physically and cognitively active and maintaining a healthier lifestyle. Rather than looking at our older citizens as dependents, we can value them as functioning societal members. Robert Butler speaks on the topic in a question and answer session after his speech at a Healthy Aging conference in Glens Falls, New York in 2009.
What do you consider productive old age?
Well, I wish I could be productive. I think one of the wonderful things about so many older people is they do volunteer, and they participate enormously in each of our cultures, our societies, and that's terrific. And we discovered in studies we did at the National Institutes of Health in the 1950s and 1960s, as I may have mentioned earlier this morning, those who have a purpose in life actually live longer. Having a purpose, a passion, doesn't have to be big time. Maybe it's even taking care of a grandchild. Whatever, something that's important to someone to get up for has a relationship to a longer life. So being productive in old age has both a selfish benefit, that is, you're likely to live longer and more healthily, and it most certainly has a benefit for society.
Okay. If a person
Okay, grab your pen and paper. It's time for a pop quiz.
has not
No. Next slide. All right. Most older adults are serene, worry-free, and at peace with the world. True. People like my dad and stepmom are quite happy to do the traditional RV road trips or just putter around the house, as my dad says. But it's also false, because many face poverty, loss of social stature, and decreased control over their lives, causing depression. Older adults are rigid, set in their ways, and unable to change. False. Inflexibility occurs at all ages, not just in late adulthood. Further, a person can be flexible in one area while inflexible in another. Most older adults are senile. True. The word senile actually means to be aged. People commonly associate it with dementia because when the APA's publication of the second revision of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, known as the DSM, was released in the 60s, the term senile dementia referred to people aged 65 and older who suffer from Alzheimer's disease. Pre-senile dementia was termed for people who developed dementia before 65 years. However, when the fourth revision of the DSM was released in the 90s, senile dementia and pre-senile dementia had been renamed as dementia of the Alzheimer's type, late onset and early onset, respectively. Most older adults are demented with Alzheimer's disease. False. Dementia is a disease that affects the brain and nervous system, but is not a normal part of aging. Only 5% aged 65 and over have it. Just like the word senile, a lot of people tend to use the word dementia synonymously with Alzheimer's disease. Older adults are less intelligent and have difficulty learning new skills. False. Learning rates and styles change between age groups. Just like a 30-year-old learns differently than a teenager who learns differently than a preschooler. Rogers stated that research indicates that many barriers that older people face in learning are caused by environmental factors or poor instruction rather than deficits in memory or learning capacity. Most older adults are grouchy and cantankerous. False. Rogers also stated that an individual's personality tends to remain stable over time. For example, a person who is easygoing and copes well with change when younger is likely to be easygoing and to cope well as she or he ages. Older adults are more religious than younger people. Maybe for some, as they reflect on life choices and imminent death, but realistically, the current older generation grew up in a time when religion was experienced in home and in school, creating a religious journey that deepened over time. So it's more of a generational aspect than an age-related one. Now it's time to put on our person and environment glasses and venture into the older adults' subcultural environments. Work. Many retirees who volunteer would like to contribute to their communities in more meaningful ways, but a lot of non-paid service opportunities are of the receptionist and office support type. It's not uncommon for older workers to be laid off or terminated just prior to crucial dates regarding their pension, when the company would be obligated to pay the full pension. Discrimination in hiring practices is common because older workers are stereotyped as difficult to train and having physical limitations, so younger workers are given preference. The media. A cross-cultural comparison study of the portrayal of older adults in magazines found that older women in the United States and India were underrepresented, while younger women were overrepresented. Television, movies, and the printed media tend to strengthen the idea that young is good and old is bad, and they use celebrities to do this. Take a look at this 2011 infomercial. Doesn't usually take this long to load. I hope my internet's not going to go out. Here we go.
Have you ever wanted to recapture your youth? Think about how amazing it would feel to look in the mirror and see yourself the way you looked years ago.
Before Lifestyle Lift, I would look in the mirror and I'd see an aging man.
But when I looked in the mirror, I felt really old. I had the saggy neck, the jaws, and under my eyes, I just felt like an old woman.
But something amazing happens when you change your look on the outside to match how you feel on the inside.
I love my life now because when I look in the mirror, I see the youthfulness that's inside.
Since my lifestyle lift, I have no lines on my face. Everything's just, it's like when I was 20.
A lifestyle lift is customized to give you a natural looking result. Best of all, the results are lasting.
Call to receive your free information kit. The call is confidential, the information is free, and there's no obligation.
All right, let's go on to the environment of health. Treatable conditions and illnesses are often overlooked or dismissed as being a normal part of aging. Negative stereotypes interfere with older people's enjoyment and flourishing in the latter part of life, but they also have a detrimental impact on people's health and well-being as they age. Holding negative perceptions of the aging process is not a minor problem, as it impacts upon many areas of life, such as motivation, mental health, physical health, and even mortality. Now, you might be asking yourself how a perception can cause death. I know I did. And then I learned that when people transition from middle adulthood to late adulthood, they bring with them the accumulation of negative attitudes and feelings toward the old, which they passively acquired throughout their lives. As new members of the group that they once stereotyped, they realize those stereotypes now apply to themselves, and they begin to internalize them, and self-stereotyping is difficult to resist. Over a decade ago, Becca Levy conducted a series of studies with the goal of understanding the consequences of aging self-stereotypes. What she found was that these self-stereotypes can influence older individuals' cognition, behavior, and their will to live. Participants who were subliminally exposed to negative aging stereotypes demonstrated significantly greater cardiovascular stress compared to those who heard positive stereotypes. Older individuals with more positive self-perceptions of aging live 7.5 years longer than those with less positive self-perceptions of aging. And what's happening in society? As stated by Rogers, attitudes about aging have been slowly changing, but many myths and stereotypes still exist. With the aging of the baby boom generation, some of these attitudes will continue to change. However, given the cultural emphasis on youth, ageist attitudes are hard to avoid. These ageist attitudes are more than using derogatory words, as in the opening scene. It includes direct actions such as the use of elder speak, which is a form of baby talk that is condescending toward the elder. Its basic vocabulary, simpler sentence structure, and slower speech rate is patronizing and infers that the elder is less intelligent. Assuming older people can't hear well, younger people tend to speak in louder voices with more pitch variations than typical conversational speech. Ageism also involves emotional reactions to the elderly, such as pity due to their difficult or diminished life circumstances, or anxiety because they remind us that youth and beauty will fade, that illness and disability are likely, and that death is a certainty for everyone. Some traditional cultures revere their elderly as insightful and worthy of advice and knowledge, but not the Western culture. Watch this excerpt from the documentary Aging Matters. Nope.
There really isn't a single state of aging in America because there are so many different communities and such diverse backgrounds, and people see aging so differently based on where they come from.
This diversity of experiences is not necessarily reflected in dominant cultural perceptions.
What our culture believes is that old people are slow, they're backward, they're weak, they're dependent on the real part of society, which is the younger, stronger part of society.
The assumption is in middle class culture and in mass culture that's perpetuated by consumer culture that physiological aging is a bad thing, rather than assuming that growing older physiologically is a natural thing. It has some negative consequences. It has some positive consequences. But the assumption is that it's bad and needs to be staved off.
In the United States, the media believes in something I call the doctrine of youth's perfection. In other words, that very, very brief moment in somewhere in your 20s when you were perfect. And ever since then, you've been going downhill. That's the media narrative. And so our society holds up very young, inexperienced people as being the paragons of virtue and strength and idealizes them, while setting aside real elders with real lived experience, making them virtually invisible in the media.
We function off a philosophy that being young is the place to be. As we are getting older, we fear what that's going to do to our status in life, to how people view us, to how people think we're competent or not. I think there's a great fear that comes with getting older, and it starts pretty young.
We split the negative and positive parts of aging culturally in our minds. We think aging is either good or it's bad. So to make it good, we'll take all the supplements, all the testosterone, all the plastic surgery, all the workout gym time that we can possibly get so that we can be at our best. There's nothing wrong with that. That's fine and wonderful. What's really problematic is the fear that's underneath it.
If you live in a society where you are measured by, judged by, elevated by, or diminished by your performance and your productivity, you live in fear of the day you can't run fast enough. People are afraid of losing their place in society when they can't perform, and that makes them fear age and aging.
The fear of aging causes us not to plan. And that means not planning for our financial future, not planning for our health care future, and not planning for our kind of social, psychological future. On a community level, we definitely are not planning. Our service support system is not adequate now. We're doing things in very traditional ways still when the landscape of aging is changing.
And on that note, let's look at redefining old age. According to Fisher and Specht, in 1989, Carol Riff identified 6 criteria for successful aging, which included positive interactions with others, a sense of purpose, autonomy, self-acceptance, personal growth, and environmental fit. This next clip is of a woman who, in just a few minutes of my watching, showed me the epitome of successful aging. Her sense of purpose and self-acceptance are astoundingly evident. And I'm going to let this gentleman introduce her.
This is a real honor and a privilege. I last saw our speaker, I think, at one of the Democratic National Conventions. I've forgotten which one, but I think it was the 1984 convention I saw her speak. And you're in for a real treat. By her positive example, she has given hope to millions of older Americans that they can continue to serve as active and productive members of society. Maggie Kuhn.
I'm touched and honored and overwhelmed. It's a great privilege to be here with you today. I thank you all for coming. I'm going to be 86 in August, but on my 85th birthday, I took stock of my wrinkles that I worked very hard to secure, and I counted my thinning gray hair, and I limbered up my arthritic hands, and I made a sacred vow that I would do something outrageous at least once a week. I am reaffirming that vow today. And I hope this is the beginning of a week. And I hope very much that you might give me a brownie point for umbrage for what I might say today. So will you listen carefully? We are living in the midst of two revolutions that have collided head on. The demographic revolution, where people are living longer than any time in recorded history. Women outlive men from 8 to 13 years. We don't know why the males of the species are so fragile, but maybe. But of course, this enlightened group of men is the exception. They are liberated, of course. With liberation, they'll survive too. We are living in the midst of a revolution, a demographic revolution. We are also living in a technological revolution, and the two have collided. The technological revolution, through miracle drugs and surgical interventions, has indeed helped us to survive. It's eliminated many of the early scourges that took out whole populations. We haven't yet conquered AIDS. We have not yet conquered Alzheimer's, but we are trying. But the technological revolution has made it extremely difficult to die with dignity. And we need to be assured, and we need to think as elders of the tribe.
The Grey Panthers is a radical social activist organization raising issues of justice and fairness for older Americans. And it was founded by Maggie Kuhn back in the 70s. So as you can see, being elderly no longer means a white-haired grandparent sitting in front of the fireplace knitting a scarf or doing a crossword. Now the over 60s are more likely to be doing voluntary work, taking part in an exercise class, studying a foreign language, or holding down a responsible job as retirement becomes pre-retirement. Check out this last clip from a 2005 PBS political drama.
Every man who lives out his normal lifespan, there comes sooner or later the fateful moment when he realizes that he is no longer young.
I want you to know, Harry, how sorry the whole company is to see you retire.
Well, you're no sorrier than I am, Ed. I may be 60, but I feel just as young as I did 15 years ago.
You betcha, Harry. But we want you to have time to tend that garden of yours and do a little fishing.
Wake up and live in Sun City for an active new way of life.
The golden years. Americans worry that it all amounts to one thing. Old folks killing time before it kills them.
Each day the dance floors are crowded with enthusiastic old-timers.
Until now, our youth-oriented culture has lived in denial. Growing old is what happens to somebody else. But these black and white images of the golden years are soon to be transformed. The baby boom is about to retire.
You've raised your family, you've made your niche in the workplace, you have established relationships, and now what? You may have 20, 30, 40, 50 more years to live. What do you do next?
We've got to realize that we're on the doorstep of a profound change in the American life cycle. We're about to invent a new stage of life.
77 million Americans are soon to embark upon an uncharted journey that will challenge old notions about retirement.
The idea that someone's going to retire and go out and spend the rest of their life playing golf is nuts. You know, you're putting your brain to sleep.
For the first time in the history of society, people are starting to think about what's possible with aging, what's the potential. What can people do to further lifelong learning, personal exploration, creative accomplishment, contributions to community and society? This is an orientation that we haven't ever seen before with the magnitude that we see it today.
So, they say baby boomers are expected to volunteer at greater rates than their parents' or grandparents' generations. In addition, the types of volunteer activities that baby boomers select are changing from their past cohorts. Previously, religious organizations were primary settings for volunteering, followed by civic or political organizations. Currently, educational, youth service, and environmental organizations are selected, indicating the priority areas for baby boomer volunteers. It's predicted that by year 2030, 19% of Americans will be senior citizens due to the youngest members of the baby boomer generation reaching retirement age. That's me. That's a 6% increase from the last census in 2010. So what does all this mean for social workers? Social workers, as suggested by Rogers, can be effective agents of change with regard to ageism. We can help to eradicate myths and stereotypes of aging through education and by modeling behaviors that support the uniqueness and worth of the aging process. We can help clients to better understand how their own ageist attitudes may be thwarting their well-being. And now that baby boomers have begun to enter late adulthood, they will transform later life just as they have made their mark on every other life stage. This generation is expected to be healthier, more highly educated, and have higher expectations than their parents or grandparents. As social workers, we can be involved in helping with their decision making, their life transitions, and family issues that result from changes in later life. Because of their higher levels of education, baby boomers will require more meaningful positions in volunteering and work than their past cohorts. This means that we social workers will need to find new opportunities in developing and supporting training programs for these new roles and in working with not-for-profit, public, and private sector agencies and employers to redesign the workday and workspace to better accommodate the reinvented retirement. While we have educational and preventive roles to play, we must become adept in understanding the type of fraud occurring and the protections available. A key challenge will be to work effectively with retirees themselves, police agencies, Attorney General's office, and the banking sector to prevent and respond to such fraud and exploitation. Support groups for caregivers, creation and management of consumer-directed care initiatives, and caregiver health promotion will be important roles for us social workers to help retirees cope with new caregiving responsibilities. And here are some quotes from Maggie Kuhn. Stand before the people you fear and speak your mind, even if your voice shakes. By the year 2020, the year of perfect vision, the old will outnumber the young. Men and women approaching retirement age should be recycled for public service work, and their companies should foot the bill. We can no longer afford to scrap pile people. Old age is not a disease. It is strength and survivorship, triumph over all kinds of vicissitudes and disappointments, trials and illnesses. Unplanned life event was my own insertion there. And for those of you who don't know, Maggie Kuhn and Robert Butler are no longer with us. But who knows? Maybe some of us can follow their footsteps. I don't know who this person is, but I like the quote. Wear your years with pride, like a badge of honor, for you have conquered, you have thrived, you have survived. And that sums up my presentation. But in closing, I'd like to encourage you to join me and many others in the positive aging movement. What is that? In a nutshell, it's about turning the doom and gloom attitude about aging into a rich and meaningful stage of life. Goodbye, ageism is the group's mantra, as is purpose, purpose, purpose. Thank you. Oh, look, there I am. Okay, well, have a good vacation. See you in a couple weeks.